the sun-kissed fantasy of endless summers,
Knew it was over, but I held on a little bit longer.
and the young and beautiful who play in it.
A little bit longer.
A place of permanent impermanence, surrounded by dense bush and powerful Tasman currents, an opportunist's playground. Because when you look beyond the postcard, something appears to be swallowing up the dreams of those who drift into its pull. Something that eventually makes you ask, what is going on here? And if you really listen, you might hear a faint voice calling back, come and see.
The worst serial killer in the nation's history has gotten away with it. Ivan Milat was convicted of 7 murders. There is someone on the North Coast that has murdered as many or more, and they are still amongst us if they haven't died or fled the country. The worst crime in our state's history is unresolved. In an age when we are trying to stamp out violence against women, violence in our community, we must hold those the police to account for their failures in this area. We must acknowledge that this is an absolute anomaly, an appalling anomaly, and has every indication that someone operated in that area, travelled that area, lived across that area, and took women, destroyed their bodies, destroyed their lives.
The clip you've just watched was the Honourable Jeremy Buckingham offering what is, to my eyes at least, a moment of political sincerity, expressing some fairly grave concerns over the unresolved homicides and disappearances of 67 women and men across the North Coast area of New South Wales between 1970 and 2015. Of that 67, only 3 were men, and all 3 of whom were either killed or disappeared alongside or in a very, very similar time span to a woman on that list. So to be clear, that number 67 does not include a multitude of men who went missing or were murdered concurrently within that time frame. Nor does it include any more recent unresolved homicides and disappearances, such as the famous cases of Tio Hayes, Erwin Farrow and Hugo Palmer, Thea Little and Jackson Stacker. The dubbing by the media, the Byron Bay serial killer, is a misnomer. It's used for clickbait, much like I have. The Byron Bay serial killer or killers is more fairly attributed to the North Coast serial killer or killers. Rumors of this mythical serial killer have existed within the region for a long time, but have really hit fever pitch after the address by the Honourable Jeremy Buckingham that we've just seen, as well as 2 viral TikToks by Laura Claire and Hey Kaylee. Now look, I couldn't find the full video. Anywhere of his address, but there is a part that I think is very poignant, so I'm going to read it out verbatim. I am concerned that the government has instantly ruled out the creation of a special commission of inquiry into these matters, and I foreshadowed that this will be the subject of debate in this place next week. I do not know how the Premier can rule out a special commission of inquiry into these murders and disappearances when he is not across the details. He has not talked to the impacted families. I was just on the phone speaking with affected family members. They are saying, we want everything thrown at this. I put on the record that the Deputy Commissioner told me today that contrary to what the police media unit says, there are causal links between some of these murders. Those who have examined the cases say that these crimes are so serious and outrageous that they must be linked. I have said it. Other people have said it. The detectives, the family, the community have said it. A serial killer, or more than one serial killer, has been operating on the north coast of New South Wales. The alternative is that 67 individual murderers have gotten away with those crimes. Whichever is the case, the egregious fact is these crimes warrant a special commission of inquiry. The government must reveal everything it knows. The New South Wales police force must reveal everything it knows about what it did to investigate these crimes and what happened, because justice and those women and their families and their communities deserve it. Alan Martin Fox, or simply Marty, was 21 years old. Now, Marty was a quiet, fairly reserved sort of guy, but had these striking blue eyes that held this determination of which was quite recognized by his friends and family. Whereas on the other hand, you have his fiancée, the vivacious 19-year-old Anneke Adriaansen, just this live wire, very vibrant and radiant young woman who with a beautiful smile that friends and family often said would just light up any and every room that she would enter. Anneke and Marty were high school sweethearts, but by no means was this love adolescent love or high school love. They had a very, very strong vision, a shared dream of this future that they were going to build. They had just applied for a bank loan, sent out invitations to their upcoming wedding, and had their eyes locked in on this particular parcel of land, this plot of land in Upper Baringa. And it was on this plot of land that Marty and Anneke planned to build this home. They planned to build this future and start married life. It was going to be away from the mundanities of living at their parents', which they both were, and away from the crucible that is living in Sydney. And so on January 11th, Marty and Anneke decide, you know what? Today's the day. And so they pack their bags and they set out to hitchhike up to the North Coast and grab, a vivid and a piece of paper and wrote on it just one thing. It said, Kempsey. And by all accounts, the trip started magnificently because the couple were soon spotted the day after on January the 12th at a bus stop in Byron Bay. And 3 days after that, on the 15th of January, the couple must have backtracked because Anneke was spotted back in Kempsey speaking to an old school friend and showing off her sapphire engagement ring and speaking with this real sense of excitement about the land that the couple were going to purchase. And that was the last anybody saw of them. A search quickly ensued, which focused predominantly around the Byron Bay area. But 2 weeks later, the focus had shifted from Byron Bay to Kempsey after the friend got in touch with the police saying, no, I saw her on the 15th. She was showing me her engagement ring. They were speaking with excitement about the future and the land that they were going to buy. But later on, much later on, when the Unsolved homicide team, cold case investigators, decided to reopen and subsequently re-examine the case, they found that this conversation didn't really happen like that at all. At least it didn't happen on the 15th of January in Kempsey, which was the last known sighting and date that police had been working off for a very long time. In actuality, this conversation took place on the 12th of January. Anneke and Marty's brief appearance at that Byron Bay bus stop was, in fact, the last known sighting of the couple. For over 2 decades, everybody had been looking in the wrong place. However, in what may be this case's most tragic irony, around about the time of the disappearance, a man came forward, saying that he too had seen the couple on the 15th of January in Kempsey. He said he saw the couple getting into a truck, presumably hitchhiking their way back home, and he was adamant about one particular piece of information, that the man he saw had the most vibrant and glowing blue eyes. This man's statement, which may have been the missing piece of the puzzle all those years ago, was lost by police in 1979 and only unearthed 20 years later by the Unsolved homicide team. Perhaps the darkest theory is that Marty and Anneke met their fate at the hands of a real monster, Ivan Milat. Ivan Milat is arguably Australia's most infamous serial killer, and it's true that he was in the North Coast area at the time. Although this was before his major span of crimes and there are no direct links that really tie him to the case, he is a major suspect in multitudes of unresolved disappearances and murders over the years. So his involvement can't entirely be overlooked. It's been almost 46 years. By now, only a handful of blurry black and white images remain of them, and most of them are fragmented and scattered between these obscure missing persons databases or in the memories of people who really loved them. That smile that would once light up every room, wiped off. Those eyes that were full of determination, shut. And the only trail that was ever really left was the trail of broken hearts. Of people who never got a why, never got a where, never got a how, just ifs. Because sometimes the deepest mysteries aren't just about what happened. They're about what didn't happen. About the questions left unanswered. And the leads that were never followed. Lives that just seemed to fade away. Joy Hodgins' story starts with loss. By the time she had turned 18, she had already suffered more heartbreak than most could imagine at that age. She was an adopted child and had recently lost her adoptive mother to cancer earlier that year in 1978. And so she had moved in to a new house with 3 of her friends, Sharon Zirinsky, Steve Matthews, and Irma Overend. Then there was Annie Tominac, who at the tender age of 17 had just begun really navigating the complexities of that transition from childhood to adulthood, and had decided in early 1978 that she was going to leave her parents' house and go and search for what she wanted to do and find her own way in the world. To be clear, this wasn't a fight or flight mechanism for Annie to get away from her parents, but rather a young woman who was taking a stand on her own life and deciding to head out by herself, even if her parents disagreed with it. So Annie moved in with Joy, actually only a few hundred meters down the road from a house where Annie grew up in, where her parents once lived. So perhaps there was an element of comfort in the proximity, the familiar streets, even while she sought her independence. Or maybe it was just that she had found a like-minded young woman in Joy that was determined to also build a life for herself, and they found friendship in each other. So on Monday evening, the 17th of July, 1978, Joy and Annie announced to their flatmates that they were going to go out and make a night of it. And they decided they were going to head to the Ambassador nightclub in Newcastle. Newcastle's Ambassador nightclub was, in the 70s and 80s, the place to be. This was a venue which hosted the likes of NXS, Midnight Oil, and the Radiators. But this night was no special night in particular. None of the bands I just mentioned were actually playing that night. The girls just really wanted to have some fun. And so they did, and they made that decision and just set off with whatever they were wearing at the time. They packed no equipment with them, nothing that would indicate to their flatmates that they planned to be gone for more than 5 hours. That 5 hours quickly turned into 12, quickly turned into 24, quickly turned into 2 days, and then 3 days. And on the 3rd day, something strange happened. A letter arrived. The letter, which was supposedly from Joy, said that she and Annie were staying at a friend's and they'd be home in a few days, but something about the letter just felt wrong. Sharon Zirinsky would later say it seemed like Joy had copied the letter from somebody else. It was unusually error-free, which didn't really match Joy's normal writing style. Justifiably alarmed, Sharon went to the police station to file a missing persons report. The police told Sharon that she couldn't file a missing persons report because she was not a parent of either 2 of the young girls. Well, what parents did Joy have? The police did take down some details, and they took the letter as evidence from Sharon. And when she returned a few weeks later to check on the status of the report, she found that no such report had actually been filed, and the letter seemingly had vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, Annie's parents, who really were the only parents capable of filing this official report, at least in the way the police wanted it filed, they didn't report their daughter missing for 3 weeks. Maybe they just weren't on speaking terms at the time, but they spoke to Annie's school friends and they said she hadn't been at school for the last 3 weeks. What happened next is a masterclass in institutional failure. In early 1979, police got in touch with Annie's mother saying, "We've been on the case and it's case closed. We've found your daughter, but she's 18 and she doesn't want you to know her whereabouts. She'll call you though." which is perfectly legal, and she's entitled to do so if she's 18. She's an adult now. But here's the thing, that call never arrived, and she wasn't and wouldn't have been 18 at the time. She was still 17. So when Joy's adopted brother Anthony took it upon himself to reinvestigate the case in 1990, he made the shocking discovery that the police did not even have a file on Joy. Nothing. She wasn't even listed as a missing person. 1998 comes around, and a human jawbone washes up and is found on Stockton Beach, which led to the reopening of several cold cases, including Joy and Annie's. And it was because of this reinvestigation in 1998 where police realized for the first time that these cases were interlinked and that these two young women went missing together. Police claimed they had solved the mystery, they had cracked the case, that both girls were simply runaways. They even rather specifically claimed that Annie had run away to Cook's Hill with a man named Gary to have his babies in 1979. So yeah, there are a lot of glaring holes, like what happened to Joy? What happened to Joy, and what happened to that suspicious letter that Sharon handed in all those years ago? Or maybe why was Annie still listed as a missing person on databases in 1980 despite police having found her safe and sound in 1979? 47 years later, all of those questions still remain. Annie is listed still as a missing person on the New South Wales Missing Persons database, while Joy still isn't listed as a missing person. However, Joy is included on a government list of missing persons. So these two young women's cases seem to exist in a limbo of contradictions, solved and yet unsolved, and closed yet open. If the police's speculative theory is to be believed, then out there somewhere today, perhaps, is a person in their mid-40s who would be the son of Annie and Gary from Cook's Hill. And somewhere definitely is the truth about what happened on Monday, the 17th of July, 1978, when those two women stepped out of their house and never returned. What is particularly touching about Joy's story is how deeply she was loved by those around her, those that she had. Her adoptive grandmother, Ella Anderson, once wrote, "Joy was a little girl who needed love, and I loved her so much. I wish I knew what happened to her. I think about her so much." The story of Joy and Annie isn't just about two teenagers who went missing and vanished in the middle of the night like so many did before them and so many did after them. It's about the repercussions of what a missing person's disappearance does to the grandmother who died in vain wondering, the flatmates who would have spent years, decades wondering, did we act too late? What happened to our friends? What happened to our flatmates? But one thing it's really about is a system that failed these girls over and over and over and over again.
A team of detectives combs a Lake Macquarie dig site that could be the key to a mystery that's haunted the hunter for more than 40 years. These latest developments have prompted a woman to speak publicly for the first time. In 1981, she was 19, and in a relationship with Belmont man Warren McCorriston, she suffered months of violent attacks.
He was punching me, and he ended up breaking my ribs and puncturing my lung. I felt like he was going to kill me, and I felt like it was on his mind all the way to that hospital. The attacks and the rage were coming from nowhere. You couldn't predict it, you couldn't see it coming, and all of a sudden, he would just attack.
She recalls him talking about how he knew Robin Hickey. They had attended Belmont High School together, but he never wanted to talk about her disappearance.
He would always shut the conversation down. He was never willing to speak about her. Later on, he told me that he would catch the same bus as Robin into town to work.
And finally, just like to play, I guess, for lack of a better word, what is an epitaph? a mural almost, for probably a better word, of all the men and women who are featured on the list of the Honourable Jeremy Buckingham, and that's so I think you can get a bit of a sense of scale for the tragedy and the sort of evilness that has befallen that area in the last 50 years. So it's really long and it's quite sad, and if you want to watch it, and if you don't. But I think I'm going to play it after every episode. So until next time.